It is my immense pleasure to introduce to you all the last speaker for today's invited talks, Dr. Adriana Bankston. Adriana Bankston is a Principal Legislative Analyst in the University of California, Office of Federal Governmental Relations, where she serves as an advocate for UC with Congress, the administration, and federal agencies. Prior to this, she was also a Policy and Advocacy Fellow at the Society for Neuroscience. And in addition to working at UC, she also serves as co-director of Policy Taskforce at Future of Research. And she's also the Chief Outreach Officer at the Journal of Science, Policy and Governance. The title of her talk is Empowering the Next Generation of Neuroscientists in Science Policy. And I will just share a brief abstract of her talk. In this presentation, Dr. Bankston will describe her career journey from the bench to science policy and ways in which she works to empower early career researchers in science policy. She will also provide details on her experience as a Policy and Advocacy Fellow at Society for Neuroscience and current involvement with the Journal of Science, Policy and Governance and the local chapter of SfN in Washington, D.C. And she will also discuss her role as a Chief Outreach Officer at the JSPG and how the JSPG publishes and elevates the work of early career researchers in science policy. I have also worked with Adriana in personal capacity as well as the JSPG prior, and it has been a truly delightful experience, and I'm sure Adriana would love to talk about that more. So thank you so much, Adriana, for joining us today. If you would now like to go ahead and share your screen and your presentations.
Great. Thanks, Judy. Thanks for having me here. Let's see if I can do this. There we go. Okay, great. So thanks again. It's really delightful to be here. I heard a little bit about the previous talk, and it seems like there's a lot of science-related talks. So this will be a little different. I will share a little bit about my path, but really what I'm really interested in and wanting to pursue is looking at how we can empower young scientists, specifically with a science policy lens. And so I'll be discussing JSPG as part of this. Just want to let you know, I'm also on Twitter at Adriana Bankston. JSPG is a disciple journal, so feel free to tweet and tag us. That would be really great if you could do that as I'm speaking as well. And then also, obviously, the Neuro November 2020 hashtag. So before I talk about anything, I have to just give this disclaimer that I'll be talking about my personal views and opinions and not the views of the University of California. So I'm going to start way back because I realized as I was preparing for this talk that my passion for empowering young scientists really comes from a long time ago, actually from my grandpa, who has really dedicated his career to this. Long story short, so he was an MD. He ended up doing research because he wanted to understand specific diseases more, but a lot of the things that he did in his career and sacrifices that he made really came down to empowering scientists and thinking about creating environments where they could sort of illustrate their talents and potential. So this is goes back a long time. And then the other thing to mention is my parents are both faculty. They work at cardiovascular and orthopedic diseases. So sort of between these two things, I have kind of been looking to blend my interest in science and this idea of inspiring young scientists through my upbringing and really how that's affected what I'm doing today. So to give you some background about my training, so obviously I'm bringing the US perspective here, but will be a little bit broader when I talk to JSPG. So about JSPG, so I got my bachelor's at Clemson, my PhD at Emory. So these are both good schools in terms of scientific training. The training at Emory, so I'm going to sort of frame this talk around young scientists and what this thread has looked like throughout my career and less about the research. So just to mention here that the BCBB program is really cross-disciplinary. So I did get exposed to neuroscience research as well as others. So we had seminars where we presented our research, but also ways to really learn about a lot of different types of research. It's a really innovative program. It allows experimentation, and there's a lot of really smart people in the program. It's, I think, one of the best in the country, and was really lucky to be part of this. The other thing to mention is, when you think about training scientists, one thing that's important is grant writing. So actually, this was, I think, at the time, one of the few schools that had a grant writing class, which my advisor co-directed. So we had to take the class and write a grant on our research, which we could submit to for funding, which is really helpful, I think. And so just to highlight this idea that I think this sort of training is important and necessary to exist across institutions. And again, was really lucky to be part of this and be able to learn this through Emory. So afterwards, I ended up doing a postdoc at University of Louisville. So this is in Kentucky. If you know anything about Kentucky, it's kind of middle of nowhere. It's a public school that is sort of up and coming. Again, the research was really good. I went there for a specific PI, and but obviously it was a different environment from being at Emory, which is a private school. And this is sort of both, I guess, a blessing in disguise in a way, because being here, I started contemplating what other careers could I go into, and really looking to develop my own career path. And through this, actually, because U of L is fairly small and doesn't have a lot of resources for postdocs, so I ended up starting this seminar, which is called CRAFT, Career Research Advancement Focused Training, which is basically a monthly seminar that they bring speakers to talk to postdocs about careers. And this was really useful, obviously, to learn about different career paths, but also really got me interested in this whole idea of training. How are universities training grad students and postdocs for careers? And I think the training side of things became more interesting to me than the actual bench research. And so I followed this up by organizing a research symposium to foster kind of a regional community of researchers, as well as join the university postdoc committee, which is another way to gain some leadership skills, but also really kind of interplay with faculty and administrators and the dean of the grad school and other people who were sort of thinking about training. So it was an really interesting way, insight to policies in institutions. And so this is just one of the talks that we had at CRAFT, since I'm talking about science policy, so you're free to check out the website, but we did have a few talks about science policy as well, this is very early when I really didn't know much about the field and just starting to learn it. So keeping on with this career exploration now, I was sort of becoming interested in the training aspect, how are institutions training students, how do I get into this field? And so for a long time, I wanted to be working in this area of maybe working on doing programs for postdocs, for example. And so I looked to join some organizations that were working on this. And so one is the National Postdoctoral Association. So this is a large US organization that has a lot of administrators that teach postdocs. The other one is the Graduate Career Consortium, which is similar. So again, just to sort of try to get in this world of higher education and training and figure out if that's something I wanted to do and how to move into it. And it really gave me an idea of what the broad landscape looks like related to training, what it looks like across the US, what people are thinking, how we need to change training and education to prepare students for the workforce. At the same time, being in Kentucky, so to be honest, there's not much to do there. I joined the Kentucky Academy of Science to see what they were doing. So they have a lot of outreach and really good programs for public engagement. And it just so happened that they were starting this award in excellence in science education and outreach, which I was part of this committee. And it was an interesting way to think about how you apply your science to society, and something that pretty cool, I guess. That's something that we started through KAS, and they still have it. It was just awarded recently. So this was kind of a very small exposure to the societal value of research, really, again, not knowing a whole lot of how to use my skills to go in that direction, but definitely piqued my interest in policy and societal value of science. So moving more deeply now, as you can see, so now I was becoming interested in kind of larger issues of training and what this looks like across the United States. And then again, was really lucky to join this nonprofit called Future of Research, which is basically was started by a bunch of former academics who wanted to study the academic system and advocate for systemic change. A lot of them ended up doing non-academic careers, but we all kind of came back and we're still working on issues related to higher education. How do we improve the system for the next generation? So we do this through events. This is one of the events we had around expanding leadership for early career researchers. So a lot of the ways that we operate is a very grassroots sort of fashion where we have meetings and workshops across the country. We then publish the results and then say, here's what young scientists think about these issues. This is one example. We had a few meetings on mentoring, and then publish that to sort of get the voice of early career researchers out there. So it ends up being a lot of publications around workforce development and trying to push for policy change within institutions. And this is one of the papers that we published. So we also published this leadership workshop. This is another one around training. So this comes from our mentorship meeting that we published recently at eLife. And again, trying to give some recommendations to different areas in the university. So what can PIs do? What can departments do, et cetera, to improve training for early career researchers. So this was really, sort of the beginning of this idea of what does this look like nationally? And it was really fascinating, I think, in part for my academic training and that I still like publishing, but it seemed like it was really motivating to work on these issues and be able to publish and advocate for these things as having come from academia and being able to publish some of these things. So this was really exciting, again, as I was sort of exploring my path. And in 2016, there was a federal labor law mandating that postdoc salaries should increase across the US. So this was, again, very pertinent because I was coming out of my postdoc and really looking at this data of will institutions comply with this law, essentially. So we published this paper looking at a large number of institutions across the US, whether they would comply with this. We then followed that up by another study looking at actually how much postdocs are getting paid across the US. So this is just one of the graphs looking at the different titles. You can see in the bottom, there's 11 different titles for postdocs across institutions, which makes it very hard to figure out what is a reasonable scale to pay them because they're not called the same thing all over the US. And then, there's a lot of disparities related to cost of living as well, and it doesn't correlate necessarily. So this was a really interesting project because, number one, it gave us an idea of how can we obtain institutional data, how transparent were institutions going to be with this data, which obviously not all of them were. And then at the same time, with the Fair Labor Standards Act, this was sort of the connection between the policy and academia, in that there was this federal law that actually affected postdocs, which is really fascinating to me at the time. And I think it was kind of the impetus to move into the policy space and figure out how can I be working on these things that sort of at the interface, again, of academia and policy, but in the lens of how do these two intersect and still keeping this interest with early career scientists. So this sort of then dovetailed into JSPG. So I'm going to spend a little more time on this because I'm also here sort of in the capacity as the Chief Outreach Officer. And this is a really, I think, an organization that is focused on elevating early career researchers in science policy. And so just to give you some background, if you haven't heard of JSPG, so it's an international journal, it's open access, it's peer reviewed, It's also a nonprofit, but really our main goal beyond publication is to elevate the voices and the authors that are published here through different means. It's also empowering young scientists in the sense that we are sort of internally in the system. Obviously, we publish work from early career authors. We have also early career folks on the editorial board. So it's really very focused on this being managed by and for students, as well as policy fellows. There's a lot of fellows who have gone through the publication process, and other scholars who are early career in other fields. So I'll show you in a little bit. It's very broad. And then, as I said, we also want to go beyond the publications to really engage the authors in debating these issues on a broader scale. So with that said, our mission is to help students and early career scholars from all academic backgrounds bolster their research and writing credentials and policy. So a lot of them have said that it's very useful for them to go through the publication process and learn how to do this, as well as from the editorial side. And we really want to encourage them to engage in sort of policymaking process at all levels of government. So depending on what they write about, it might be a local, national, international, again, different scales of where they think these policies should be implemented that they're proposing. And this is where my role comes in. So we promote published work. We have a newsletter. We have a Twitter account. We're pretty active and promote issues when they come out on social media. We also do individual outreach as well as an organization and other channels that I'll discuss a little bit more. So in terms of the scope, so we basically publish write-ups that are research-based from every corner of science and technology policy. I'll show you in the next slide what that means. Just to show you here also, it's a very large scope. So there are different types of write-ups, different lengths with different purposes. So op-eds and memos, technology assessments, as well as policy analysis and white papers that are more involved, book reviews, workshop proceedings, etc. So it's really broad in terms of the kind of articles that we accept. And that gives a lot of opportunity, I think, for authors to publish different things depending on what they're working on. And so here you can see all the topics that we publish about. It's very broad, as I mentioned. Some things to mention here. So you can see artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, government, university, industry interfaces. We publish on the environment and climate change, STEM education and workforce, science communication, and so on. So again, you can check out our website, sciencepolicyjournal.org. We're also on Twitter at SciPol Journal. And you can read more about what's been published and see if you're interested in submitting here. And I'm happy to talk more about it as well. So just to reiterate this point of, so what happens after the publications are out? And again, a lot of this has come in with my role as doing outreach for the journal. This is one of the issues that we published this year with the United Nations Major Group for Children and Youth. That is around equitable technology. We had a webinar as well as a podcast related to this, which I think went very well. And it's an experiment, but I think it's a good way to engage authors again on the broader scale in policy. This is another webinar, just to give you another example, with the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowships around policy careers with folks that are on the editorial board, or they were, and they sort of use JSPG as well as AAAS to advance their policy careers, and this was very popular. And this is the podcast that I mentioned, and just one example of an episode that we had. So you feel free to check this out. It's on YouTube and SoundCloud. It's called SciPol Soundbites. And it's really a short interview looking at having the authors speak about their publications and sort of broader impacts. We also do training. So I was involved in this policy training memo writing workshop with the National Science Policy Network, which is really nicely done in terms of giving instructions as well as ways to practice writing. So there seems to be a lot of interest now with instruction as well as how do you write a good policy piece to submit to JSPG, which you really haven't done. And so we started doing more of these as well. We partnered with the University of California, Irvine this past year to offer the certificate program in science policy and advocacy, where JSPG was a partner as well as other organizations. And I think it was a really successful virtual program that we hope to do again, that trained scientists on a lot of fundamental skills, including policy writing. So hopefully that gives you an idea of what JSPG is, what are things you can do, and the ways that we feature authors after a publication. So moving forward, since I actually haven't talked a lot about neuroscience, this is where this comes in. So I'll spend a little time discussing my fellowship with the Society for Neuroscience. So moving back to sort of the career path, as you can see, it's sort of progressed from being interested in how do we train scientists to how does that relate to the policy space, how do we empower them in the space. And this fellowship really fit in very well in that. It was really my first fellowship or sort of real job, I suppose, in policy, where I was doing, full-time in an office that was looking at liaising with representatives. They also have a very strong training component. So I'll give you a few examples of the things that I was doing at SfN. But it was really nice because the fellowship is in the advocacy and training department. So I actually was able to do policy advocacy and training all in those 6 months, which was really great. So really loved my time there and highly recommend SfN for any training that you're looking for. So one of the main things here is Capitol Hill Day. So this is something that they do every spring, was part of the fellowship time, and the fellow sort of is able to do the back end of planning and implementing with a large team and have a lot of meetings with representatives to advocate for science funding and research and training. And it's a really nice event. The other thing, sort of large scale, is representing SfN at coalition meetings. So a lot of the things and the ways that policy functions is through sort of co-authoring some advocacy letters, for example, to the Hill. If you're looking for something, it's more successful if you're kind of working with a bunch of other groups at the same time. So this is another skill to learn, is how do you represent a society and their interests in this larger scale. The other thing is, and this is a lot of what policy is doing research and relationship building with representatives. So this, we created this Neuroscience Champions Checklist, which is basically representatives that have supported SfN or neuroscience funding over the years through obviously legislation, programs. It can even be tweets or lab tours, anything like that, even at the annual meeting, sometimes they'll come and take a picture with grad students who are members of SfN and again, engage them that way through the meeting. So it's really useful, I think, because number one, it teaches you how to research policymakers, which is important when you're trying to talk to them and give them your pitch. And number two, it's really a useful resource to have. And so that's something that I think is helpful to work on overall. So moving on to the training side, one of the things that they have is this Early Career Policy Ambassadors program, which is, I think, a one-year program where they have, they select 10 members to come to Hill Day. So this is a picture from Hill Day. And then they do advocacy activities during the year. It's also another really good way to engage in policy when you're starting out as a student. So I encourage you to check that out as well. They have a lot of online courses. I was able to participate in a mentoring class that they were doing through SfN in a virtual setting. And then other, just a sample of things. They have this Latin American training program. So again, focusing on diversity as well. And it was really interesting to see how they advocate for this and really try to engage different students from different backgrounds with SfN. So really nice training opportunities. One thing to mention is obviously communication is really important to science policy. So, and this is both writing, there's a lot of writing, and I'll show you in my job, it's probably 90% of the time is writing. There are certain things that we do and a little bit of, I guess, policy instruction here. One thing is the congressional testimony. So this is a certain way of writing about essentially advocacy for neuroscience funding to NIH or NSF, which is essentially what the SfN president would use to testify in Congress. So it's a real interesting document to work on. Other things that I did, which are very common in policy also, are RFI. So the NIH was looking for public input on the BRAIN initiative, which is things like including more data, ethics, a lot of animal research ideas. And it's really nice, I think, to be able to have an input to the community and what they are looking for, and from the SfN standpoint. And again, learn how to write this sort of response, which is very useful to know in policy. And the last communication item is the Advocacy Network newsletter. So this is, again, something I do every day. A newsletter that has information on advocacy from members, a lot of times what their early career members have done, but also looks at the federal landscape, what the president is doing, what new legislation comes out, and so on. So it's really a way to inform the membership about the advocacy side of SfN. And again, very useful to learn how to write these summaries. We did have a lot of events as well. So there are hearings, markups, and briefings. So a lot of different events on the Hill to showcase different legislation. The president's budget came out in the spring, and we were looking at how much of that is allocated to NIH and NSF, since those are two big funders of neuroscience. And again, learning how to read a budget and figure out how much of it goes to a specific agency is another skill. And besides all of these things, there are sort of two major areas that they focus on. So the Capitol Hill Day and all of this advocacy is a big side of SfN. And the other side is the annual meeting, which is a really large gathering. And they, again, part of the fellowship is to help a little bit with this, because they take advantage of the fact that you have a scientific background and you can help. So I was involved in naming or giving suggestions for speakers for some of their panels, doing sort of the background of who might be a good speaker. And as I mentioned before, they really are trying to also link representatives to research labs to get them to go see the labs in their district, as well as link with students at the annual meeting. So it's another way to impact and contribute to SfN through the annual meeting planning. So the other thing, as you probably saw, so I don't have a neuroscience degree, but being at SfN really made me really interested in neuroscience overall. Again, as I said, I was exposed to it at my PhD. And after I was at SfN, I really liked it and wanted to continue being involved with neuroscience somehow in the policy space. So I joined the local DC chapter, which is really active. It's one of the best, well, I guess I don't know, but it's really nice to be able to try and make some local impact through SfN here to this chapter. So just there's some of the things that we have done. So I'm currently the co-chair of the Neuropolicy. So we've done one presentation for the members about how legislation works. And just some general basic things around policy and advocacy, general principles, which went very well. We recently organized a session at the Sigma Xi scientific conference around different career options with both policy, nonprofits, and other things. And I talked a little bit about professional development in JSPG as well. Again, thinking more broadly about how do we train the workforce to go into different careers, and again, what that looks like. That went very well. So that just happened recently too. And we also presented a poster there about how do we train the neuroscience workforce through communication and public engagement. So there's a lot of different organizations and resources to learn science communication, both federally and locally. And so again, mentioned JSPG and a few other nonprofits and organizations here to look at. So it's been a nice experience. Obviously a lot of virtual events, but it's a different type of engagement than I was able to have through the SfN fellowship. So now moving to my current job, because I thought it would be interesting to just give you a little bit of an idea of what I'm doing as a legislative analyst working for UC. So basically, this is the sort of federal arm of the UC system, advocating for research, education, and healthcare that goes on in the system with Congress, the administration, and federal agencies. So it's a lot of different things. A lot of my role is legislative analysis, really also advocacy and connecting researchers from campus to Capitol Hill. So we've done a number of events before COVID to bring them here. Now we've done virtual panels. So this is one of the events I organized when I joined, not shortly after joining, around around how UC is responding to COVID in terms of the research side of things. So we had really good panelists talking about their research on this. So this is one example of one of the things we do. Keeping on with kind of the training and workforce development. So this has become more prevalent now, especially with COVID, because there's a lot of concern about the next generation. Will students stay in academia? What will happen to the pipeline and so on? And so this has actually worked out pretty well for me because I actually get to work on workforce issues in my job now, which I probably wouldn't have done if it wasn't for COVID. So not that they wouldn't be interested, but it's just more emphasized now because of this. So these are some of the things I've been involved in. One of the things that I didn't mention here, but we do meet with program managers at federal agencies to learn about new reports, grants, as well as programs coming out. So this is one of the things I was looking at is the skilled technical workforce, which is basically to, I think it's the college level and what jobs people can get without actually going into higher education. But there's a lot of, there's a big workforce that doesn't have these advanced degrees and what they're doing in society, which is really interesting. So one of the first things I did here was able to meet with the program director for this skilled technical workforce program, which is really interesting. So again, keeping on with this theme, recently in August, there was a bill that came out, which is called Supporting Early Career Researchers Act. Again, really interesting. I don't think this would have happened otherwise. It's basically trying to kind of extend the time for postdocs through supplements and again, giving a really more highlighting this idea that we need to try and help the early career researchers in the system and working on this. So that's interesting. There's also a lot of diversity initiatives which existed, but I think they're more heightened now with what's been going on in the world. But just to highlight one of the programs that we have, so UC does have a lot of partnerships with different institutions. And we do have a partnership with HBCUs to improve diversity and strengthen grad programs by so it's a really interesting position. And I think it's an interesting time now to be working for a university both on the research side as well as, this pipeline and diversity. There's a lot of things that have surfaced now because of COVID that were important, but they're even more emphasized now. So I'm happy to talk more about this, but I just wanted to give you a flavor of the things that we look at. So in the last last part of this, I thought it would be helpful to just give you a little bit of idea of what it takes to work in science policy, because I imagine that if you're a student thinking about this, you actually already have a lot of skills, which I just mentioned again in the vein of early career researchers, because a lot of times they don't think they have skills or they can't make an impact. I think science policy is a way to make a big impact, even if you're starting out and you are just a student. So one thing to mention is that a lot of people who are in policy don't have a science background. So you're really bringing this expertise to them, and you can also understand how the scientific process works. Obviously, you've analyzed data, you've done critical thinking as well as project management. So a lot of my job and a lot of what policy is, a lot of project management actually. Depending on the type of job that you have, you may be doing more research or you might be spending more time on the Hill. And but these skills are all important, and a lot of times as a policymakers really rely on this expertise that you bring to them, and they can use to inform their decisions. And I would say things to develop, obviously communication, as you've seen, is really important to learn how to speak to and write to policymakers. So that's something to develop, and sometimes it happens as you go. So I think I'm still learning a lot of things kind of day by day in my job, just being in certain situations, learn how to write certain things. One thing to point out is audience analysis. So this is goes into kind of looking at the background of who you're talking to, the policymaker, what their interest and background is on a specific issue that you're advocating for. As well as what the community is doing. So this is kind of where consensus building comes in. As I mentioned in the start, a lot of advocacy is done through a lot of organizations kind of signing on to a letter which goes to the Hill. So trying to get the community to agree on, certain funding numbers, certain asks that you have for policymakers to do for you does take a skill to build this consensus and then sort of agree on something. And then lastly, networking skills and professional relationships. This is really important. You've probably heard this already, but a lot of the way science policy works is kind of being in the right place at the right time, trying to build that connection that you have. Some of this does relate to connecting to policymakers, but a lot of it is connecting to your peers, knowing about what they're working on. And this is helpful when you're starting out in policy and you want to understand what the different jobs look like, what the day-to-day looks like, and then that is really helpful. So when you apply for jobs and you're able to kind of leverage that into relationships that you maintain, people that it's actually, I would say science policy is actually a pretty small world. Everyone kind of knows each other in the field. And this is helpful when you're looking to advance in your career, looking for the next job, etc. So this is something to maintain and keep doing as you're entering the field and once you're in the field too. So the last thing I'll say is, science policy, I think, well, first of all, I think it's really exciting. I think it's a unique way to make an impact on the issues that you care about, and I'm looking to still do this through early career researchers and the academic system. And one thing I think that is important to keep in mind is that the way that you can sort of stand out is to have something that you're passionate about and sort of build on that. So as you've seen, I've done a lot of projects around early career scientists. People started to know that this is what I'm interested in, started to invite me to different things to speak on these projects, and that just kind of grows on itself, grows from there. And I think it's important to develop this kind of story for yourself and on a specific issue you're interested in. A lot of it for me has been just exploring and then seeing this is something I like, do more of it and see where it goes. But it's important to get your voice and ideas out there. You can do it through blogging. Fellowships are kind of down the road, but there are ways to gain experience in policy through committees and volunteering and writing and so on that you can do sort of on the side of your research too. And really showing that you're excited and committed to this path will happen, I think, as you start doing more activities, and will help you stand out in policy. So the last, I just want to leave you with some resources. These are just a few of many. ASBMB has a nice course around the art of science communication. They kind of take you through your project and you polish your pitch, which is helpful. I'll just put a plug in for Scientific Society. So AAAS is one that has a lot of resources, but if you have or a member of a scientific society, I would look at their sort of policy and communication section to see what you can learn. There's a lot of career panels and professional development. ESAL is another group, so this is a local engagement sort of group. You can also learn a lot from them about ways to engage with policymakers, and they have some nice documents on their website. NSPN is also helpful. Again, there's a lot of opportunities and committees you can join. Again, we'd encourage you to check out JSPG. I'm happy to discuss more about how you can get involved and publish here. And then SfN, this is just the local chapter, but definitely highly encourage getting involved with SfN as a whole as well. So this is the last slide. Just want to leave you with my contact. So I have my website here, LinkedIn and Twitter. So feel free to connect. I'm happy to chat more about science policy, JSPG, or anything that I described today. So thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Adriana. That was a really important presentation, and the points you addressed were really, really important. I think it's very imperative to not just do science, but also effectively ensure that the science is translated into evidence-based policymaking, which is something which is very imperative right now, especially in the situation we are facing with COVID-19. So I'm just wondering is my video frozen? For some reason.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hello?
Hi, Adriana. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I guess Tuti lost the internet connection.
Oh, okay, sorry, something happened. So, okay. So the ECPA, I put the link in the chat. I'm looking at the
questions. Do you want me to?
Yeah, so they were asking about, is the ECPA open to non-citizens? I don't know if that's the case. I think if you're a member of SfN, you can apply. It looks like most of them are US, but be worth checking out and contacting them about that.
Okay, that helps.
The other question, could any other fellowships regarding neuroreferrals? Yeah, so there are, so the fellowships, I think there's a lot of variations. So something like AAAS is actually only open to citizens. There are other ones that you can apply to. Some of them are very broad. So AAAS, you kind of apply to this broad program and then you get placed into a specific area. The neuroscience would come into, like, if you get placed, the NINDS, for example. SfN is another way to do it. So I think, you know, it's a different experience because you're AAAS, there's a lot of fellows, they kind of place you where they want you to be. SfN is obviously it's very specific to this, but it's a different experience in that you're the only fellow there for 6 months, which is nice because you get a lot of personal attention and it really is focused on neuroscience. But there are other broad fellowships that have kind of neuroscience sections or places you can look at. I can share a couple of links to look at.
That would be helpful. Thank you. Thank you so much for that.
Let me see this. There's one. So as I said, a lot of them are for citizens. This one actually does show you which ones are not. From FASAB, and then there's another one from GSA, Genetic Society of America, that has a large database that you can sort through fellowships. So I'll put that in here too. And then I'm also happy to chat more about which ones are open. I know a few of them that are non-citizens can apply to them. So
I probably missed if they can reach out to you on Twitter or your Gmail account if people have more questions.
Yes, Twitter is great.
Reach out to you.
Yeah, LinkedIn,
cool.
for chat on LinkedIn, Twitter, let me put that in here too. And I'll give you my email too.
Okay, that would be helpful. Thank you. We have one more question as well. Do you want to answer that?
Yeah, just 1 second. So that one, Twitter is Adriana Bankston, and then this is my Gmail. Okay. So can non-US resident grad students publish articles on their JSPG? Yeah, so JSPG is an international journal. Anyone can submit from anywhere in the world. Two ways you can submit. So there's standard issues and special topics. So the standard issues are what the one I showed you about technologies. Is basically twice a year. We have open deadlines to anyone can submit any of the formats that I showed you. And it's kind of an open-ended general issue. The deadlines are in the spring and fall. So the next one will be the spring. And then we'll have some special topics coming out where basically all the publications are on the topic. We'll have a climate change one coming out in the spring. The deadline is January, and they're actually doing a competition. It's through the UK Science and Innovation Network. And they actually have a competition as part of this where the top 3 can present at the British Embassy. I'll share this one too. So there's going to be, so some of our issues, we're starting to do more of this kind of competitions. For some of these, I'll share another one. This one, we also published one with NSPN where it's specific to policy memos. And they also have a competition with basically the top 3 memos get cash prizes and they get highlighted in certain places. So this is also really helpful, but it's specific to policy memos, which is also very popular. So it's another way to publish, and we're hoping to have another offer this again and then next year and make this an annual competition. But the climate issue is also another way to look at if you're interested in climate issues. But as I said, the standard issues are also open to anybody to publish on anything during the year. So
okay.
Look out for that in the spring. I think the deadline is in May.
Stuti, do you want to continue?
Yeah, sure. So sorry about the network issues. Thank you so much, Adriana, and thank you so much, Pranjal, for covering up. It was a really insightful talk, as I was saying, and it's very important that advocacy and policy is collectively takes place, especially when you're doing science. So Adriana, I have a question. Like, we have a lot of young audiences attending, and participating today with us. So what advice do you sort of have to give to maybe undergrads or early, high schoolers who just are getting started with the field of neuroscience, and if they want to take up a career in science policy making?
So I think there's a lot of ways to get started. So thinking back to the way that I did, I think writing is really helpful. So I actually, when I started, I did a lot of blogging related to how I think academia should improve, and people started to notice that. So that's one way to do it, is write about your research or any topic you're interested in kind of mainstream media. There's a lot of blog platforms also for early career. Some people start their own blogs, so definitely would encourage you to write about something that you're interested in not just academic type of ways. Like I mentioned, also scientific societies, also if your institutions have groups, so a lot of times they'll have science policy groups, and if they don't, a lot of students have started their own groups, which I would also encourage, and it gives you some leadership opportunities to really, get a group started around this. So if you have local opportunities, that's one thing to look at as your institution. There's a lot of times local sort of public engagement opportunities. So when I was in Kentucky, they had a really nice science center where they do a lot of kind of science experiments for kids, and there's high school students who volunteer. I think they started even like a camp that they do every year for girls who want to get into science and that kind of thing. So it's really nice. I think public engagement is another way to do this and get kind of your foot in, realizing how what you're working on kind of affects society. And then, SfN is a good place, and if there are other societies you can join, and organizations. I think maybe as a high school student, maybe there are some limitations, but there are also nonprofits like, Future of Research and other groups that you can volunteer with to kind of build some of these skills, and they're not restricted to, citizens or grad students or things like that. So there's a lot of options, I think, to develop skills. So, and I'm also happy to chat more one-on-one if you'd like.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Adriana, for coming in so early in the morning. I know it's pretty early back there in the US. So it was really nice having you. And Adriana has given all the contacts and the ways that you can reach out to her. And she's very prompt in replying back to emails as well. So I'm definitely sure that she will be able to help you out in any way that she can. So thank you so much, Adriana, for joining us. It was a really great talk.